In this episode of the woodshop build, we're finishing our two mobile multifunctional workbenches. They're featuring a pop-up miter saw, a pop-out thickness planer, power tool storage, dust collection, battery charging, a router table, and a table saw with improved fence, an infeed table, a crosscut sled, extra storage, and dust collection. It's really nice to be able to actually use the workbench to finish the build. In the last episode we finished the miter saw workbench, and in this episode we're finishing the table saw workbench. To start, we're making a drawer for storing accessories for the table saw and router table, and we're making a dust collection drawer to go underneath the table saw. The large storage drawer is installed with drawer pullouts, and we're just making room for the faceplate and installing the cabinet part of the pullout at an arbitrary height in the cabinet. It seems to be a theme in this video that there's a bit of a delay in the sound. The dust collection drawer is made the same way as all the drawers in the woodshop cabinet build, with sliders attached to the side of the cabinet and the drawer sliding on its own bottom. As fronts for the drawers, we're using the same laminated plywood as for the tabletop and fronts of the rest of the build, making sure to get a nice even fit and just attaching it to the drawers with screws from the inside of the drawers. When we installed the table saw, we made holes in the back for the dust collection hose, but there is also a lot of dust going underneath the table saw, so we also just cut holes here, and the top drawer is just a drawer for dust collection. This middle drawer bottom is going to be turned into a crosscut sled for the table saw later in this episode. First, there is an issue with this extension to the table saw we want to fix. It is hanging quite a lot. So far we've just used a board underneath when using it, but we wanted to make a little more permanent solution. So we're taking off the extension, and the plan is to build a box beside the table saw with an extra piece of rail attached to it and this router tabletop built into it. The box is shaped a bit odd to maximize storage and to allow the table saw to be removed from the workbench. Now, before being able to install the router top, we had to cut a hole in the front of the box to access the inside of the box. We thought about just making a door here, but the box will be much more stable this way, and we can use the hole in the box kind of as a handle to move the not so lightweight workbench around. We're using shims to adjust the height of the router top so that it will be absolutely level with the tabletop. Now, to improve the fence of the table saw, which is a bit wonky at the end, we wanted to make it longer and be able to lock to the back of the table saw. We're just adding a strip of plywood to the top of the existing fence, connected to a strip of plywood that rests along the side of the existing fence, but just a bit shorter so that it will actually be floating. This way we'll be able to make the same adjustments to the improved fence as to the original fence. These bolts were actually not the ones we ended up using. They were just sliding around in the T-rails, so we used a bolt with a little wider head instead. To be able to make a crosscut sled for the table saw, we needed to take off the top of the saw blade guide. We wanted to make a nice curved guide, but just didn't have the tools to detach the guide from the table saw. So we just cut off the top on site, and maybe we'll take it off later to make a nicer finish. This faceplate has got to be replaced at some point as well. We bought these 3D printed guides on Etsy that perfectly fit the sort of T-track on the table saw. They will be attached to the bottom of the crosscut sled, and we will route a slot in the tabletop for the sled to be able to move forward. This was the widest bit we had, so we just went 2 passes with it. As front and back of the crosscut sled, we're using a leftover piece of birch tabletop, which is nice and flat. We're attaching the back piece first, since it does need to be at a perfect right angle to the blade, and it will give some stability to the sled as we move along. The guides are glued to the bottom of the sled, and we can carefully slide the sled out of the tracks to permanently attach it with screws. Or so we thought. The sled slid nicely out of the tracks, but just wouldn't go in again. The guides fit the T-track perfect, but with them being made of plastic, they probably bent or moved just a little when screwed to the bottom. So we couldn't see any other option than to just try to turn the slides around. This way they'll just function as straight tracks as on most other table saws, but the sled will be sliding on the top part of the guides rather than on the bottom of the sled. And it actually slides quite nice this way. So moving on, we're cutting the sled almost to the back and attaching the back piece at a perfect right angle to the blade. Since it is a crosscut sled drawer, we are attaching the same drawer front as on the other drawers, and all the drawers are getting the same leather handles as all the other drawers in the shop. The table saw doesn't really fit the look of the workbench, so it is just getting a faceplate to match the router box. So now it's down to the last details, like sticking a new measure tape to the table saw guide, adjusting for the new zero. The workbenches still need some finish and to get the dust collection working, but other than that, they're just about done. And here's just a little recap of the workbench's function. So while it's nice and cold outside, we've got a nice and warm woodshop for wintertime projects. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you on the next one.